Another very important bit of machinery that needs to be added to the turret at this time is that of the gun elevation. As for this first generation Armortek kit, all of the gun elevation components are strewn out on the table that you see in front of you. This design is basically what is still used today and is relatively unchanged, as the system does work and works very well. As for the parts breakdown, they are as follows. Starting with the most important piece, which is that of a pre-wired geared motor. We have here a CNC steel threaded shaft along with a coupling which connects to the motor. We have here 3 parts manufactured out of CNC brass. We have here the main mounting lug, the actual elevation lug, which is pre-threaded, and a retention cap. Moving on, we have here a laser cut steel pre-bent motor mount, a laser cut steel pre-bent elevation bracket, another laser cut pre-bent steel limit switch mount, an electron-eyes speed controller, and the turret main cable subloom. Also not shown on this table here, but also supplied, is that of 2 limit switches with very long spoons. Now, the way the elevation system actually works is, like I said before, relatively similar to what's done on Armortek kits of today. The way it works is you have the motor, which is directly hard mounted to the turret via the mount, and this long thread shaft connects to it. Then, with this bracket here, connects to that of the inside portion of the mantlet, where this large brass square gets mounted to it. The pre-threaded lug fits inside this oval over here, and the retention cap gets mounted on the opposite end and prevents the piece from falling out. Now, the way the system works is that since both the motor mount is hard mounted to the turret and the bracket is mounted directly to the mantlet, the only pivoting or movement that can happen is in this motion here. And when the radio command actuates the motor will turn the threads, and the threads will pull or push on the lug, which will then cause the piece to cam inside this little oval that we have here. Like I said before, the system is very simple, but it does work very well, and is kind of the grandfather of the current Armortek systems that are seen on the more recent builds. Now, everything is controlled via this electron-eyes speed controller. This is a system that is found on these earlier generation kits and are no longer used by Armortek. In fact, because I changed out the electronics with the current generation from Armortek, this here will not be utilized, along with the subloom, which I'll be getting to very shortly. As for the subloom, just like on all of the other Armortek kits, this is an umbilical cord which connects the extremities and the machinery inside the turret with that of the main power and the control box found in the hull. On one side you have a very large plug which would plug into the power distributor, and on this side here you have all of the plugs and other sort of gizmos for that of the other machinery. One of these plugs here would be for the gun elevation, and this specialty plug here would actually be that for the blank firing system, which this vehicle, like I've shown, has. As for these smaller little quick connect jacks, these here are for the limit switches. Like what is shown on many of my other videos, the way to prevent the gun from over elevating or over depressing when it runs out of the camming surface on the brass block is with that of the limit switch. The barrel would be calibrated so when it hits a certain point, it hits this lever here, which in turn cuts off the power to the motor and will only allow the motor to be commanded in the reverse direction until it hits the other switch on the bottom. In the last Sherman video, as well as my other videos, I go into that in more detail and show with the radio, and I strongly recommend people check that out in order to see exactly how the system works, and it does work pretty well. However, as per the current generation of Armortek electronics that came out in about 2015-2016, this system has just been changed. Rather than utilizing the limit switches, this has been switched out with that of this device here. Apparently it's a plug which connects and bridges the motor to that of the subloom, and the subloom has also changed from the older version. Here I have the new subloom in its shipping bag. And here goes the current generation system. As you can see, the main plug has changed, as are the plugs that are on the top. From a quick glance, I could definitely tell you that this plug here is going to be that of the elevation motor, and as you can see, the jacks are exactly the same and are meant for each other. This Futaba style radio jack here would be that for the Armortek recoil system, which is how these kits are sold these days, as they are no longer capable of being fitted with that of the old-fashioned blank system like this tank is actually getting. As for these quick connects here, that I am currently unsure of. However, I will soon find out, more likely after the filming of the scene, as the pieces can start getting installed and calibrated. Moving from the actual mechanics takes us to the other components which are required for that of the turret, starting with the gun. The gun components are all strewed out on the table, as you see here. Starting from left to right takes us to the mantlet, the barrel, the gun muzzle, a fret of photo etch fastener clamps, the barrel jacket, the barrel jacket locking mount, and two trunnions. Starting with the mantlet is comprised of a single aluminum casting. All of the CNCing and machine marks have been done by Armortek, including that of the fastener mounting holes, as well as the threading themselves. The casting is very smooth in its texture, and is a very nicely done shape. Now, on the later releases of this component, these here would be done in a single piece of CNC aluminum. Moving to the barrel is made out of a single piece of CNC aluminum stock. It is pre-threaded on either end for that of the mounting equipment. The barrel is nicely done, and that it hasn't exactly changed all that much in the later incarnations. It's one of those parts that Armortek pretty much got right on the first try. In addition to the barrel, we also have here the gun muzzle. The muzzle brake is made from a single piece of CNC'd aluminum. This is also very reminiscent to their current versions, and this piece too hasn't really changed all that much up until I believe very recently, but that will be discussed in another video. As for the typical Armortek gun muzzles, they are milled out on the sides here for that of the gas escape vents for the muzzle brake. They don't have several of the smaller intricate detailing, but again give you a nice basic representation of the muzzle brake. This muzzle brake will be used on this model, and I've used these muzzle brakes on many of the other Armortek builds I've done in the past. The muzzle brake depicts that of an early production Tiger muzzle brake, in that due to the size. One of the changes made to the Tiger 1 during the production run was that towards the mid and later production units, they went ahead and reduced the size of the muzzle brake from the version you see here. The later production ones have a lot of a more smaller profile, similar to that with like what you would see on a King Tiger or that of a Yak Panther. One thing about the Armortek gun muzzles is that they have this honeycomb type hollowing out feature to them. This was done by Armortek in the earlier years. I'm not so much if this is done with the more recent releases. I believe this was really more or less done for use with the blank firing system. However, since Armortek no longer has blank firing system capabilities, their current generations have this totally drilled all the way out for that of the LEDs. On this build here, I will machine out this section here of the honeycomb, making it totally through and through, which helps the accuracy of the model. Moving to the barrel shroud, is comprised of a single piece of CNC'd aluminum stock. It has the overall correct shape of this component, and it is a very simple component even on the real Tiger 1. It's nicely done on the Armortek, has the correct profile. What will be added are that of the small little fasteners which are found on the midsection here of the real tube. These will be added, of course, after the filming of this scene. This component, as well as basically the layout of the whole gun components that you see here, has also pretty much stayed the same throughout the releases of the Armortek kit, with the exception, of course, being that of the change in material of the mantlet, in which it's casted on this version, and later ones were CNC. Same could also be said with the barrel shroud retention ring. It's made from CNC'd aluminum, all pre-drilled out, and does have the correct type of tapering and shape to it, which one would expect on the real piece. Now, moving on from that takes us to this fret here of photo etch brass fastener retention clamps. On the real Tiger 1, there would be 6 very large acorn style fasteners located on this section here, which mounts this directly to the mantlet. To keep the fasteners in one place, this was facilitated by these plates here. These plates here would be positioned in these 4 locations and would overlock each other, as well as the tabs would be bent up, thus preventing the fasteners from walking out on them. Now, this was not originally included with the Armortek kit. This was actually an aftermarket set from, I believe, Panther-Technic. Panther-Technic, like I mentioned in a previous video, had a range of hop-ups for the Armortek Tiger 1. This set here, I don't believe is in production anymore. However, it's also important to point out that on more current renditions of the Armortek Tiger 1, these pieces here are now supplied with the Armortek kit, so this fret here is basically irrelevant in regards to the newer Armortek releases. It's nice though that the owner of the tank supplied this with the kit, as this is one less component that I will have to scratch build on this tank. Moving from the fret takes us to the trunnions. Now, this is a feature that is exclusively found on the first generation of Armortek Tigers. The Tiger will only use one of these trunnions. The other trunnion is a spare and was originally supplied with the Armortek first generation Tiger 1 that was released back in 2002. What happened was Armortek changed the design of their kit and released the second generation of trunnion. Even though the second generation of trunnion was issued out to all customers of the first Armortek Tiger 1, they still were supplied with the early production Tiger that came out in 2005, and that kit came with the 2 trunnions that you see here. This is a trait found on these earlier production kits. However, it's important to point out to anyone who encounters one of these kits to tell the difference between the two, as one of these will not be used. More specifically, this version here is the one that will be omitted from the kit. The 2 pieces are comprised of the exact same material, which is that of CNC'd aluminum stock that has been squared off on either side, pre-drilled, and has mounting holes that are pre-tapped. The difference, if we notice here, are that of the fasteners for mounting on the bracket for that of the elevation system. Here I have the bracket. You can see that the bracket has large holes into it. These large holes are for an M4 or more looks like an M5 hex or Allen fastener, as opposed to the original version, which had holes for that of an M3. As for why Armortek supplied both units with the kit is a mystery to me. However, this component here will be thrown into the spare parts bin, and this will actually be the unit that gets used. On later versions of the Armortek Tiger, this component has basically stayed pretty much the same. What has changed is that of the design of the way the gun elevates and the presses. Because of that, the bracket system have changed slightly throughout the years, but basically the overall shape and the actually assembly of the component in regards to the mantlet assembly has stayed virtually unchanged. And here's the mantlet currently being assembled as well as reworked. As for what has been added to the mantlet, you could clearly see I went ahead and added the cast texturing with my usual procedure. Now, what's interesting to point out is that, like I said before in the previous scene, the Armortek component on these first batch of Tiger 1s actually featured an all-cast gun mantlet. The issue is that the casting is actually so nicely done that it's actually smoother than it would be on the real tank. So that's why the extra cast texturing was added to give it a more rougher look. As for other mods that were made, I went ahead and altered the gunner's optic, which is found here on the left-hand side of the turret. The optic that is found on the original Armortek piece features only one vision slot. This is not inaccurate, however, because this is an earlier production unit of the Tiger 1, I went ahead and added the second hole for that of the gunner's optic. As for drilling the second hole, this was done with first a center punch. The center punch makes sure that the hole is perfectly in line with the first hole, which was originally found on the kit. And then the piece was placed on my drill press and then drilled out. The drill press is a great asset for this procedure, as because the piece is nice and flat, the drill press would ensure a nice 90-degree hole directly into the material. After the holes were drilled out, I went ahead and modified the optics even further with that of the little steps which are found on the inside. It's hard to get into frame with this big sheath in the way, but as you can see, the hole is not a simple hole. The components that you see here are actually a new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line. What they are resin inserts that have the step-down detail already present. On the real Tiger 1, this is a feature found on these vehicles. The purpose of having these holes in a step-down format is that it adds a layer of protection in case a stray bullet were to enter into this section here. The 90 degrees shelf found on the step-downs will prevent the round from going and possibly damaging the optic. This type of design was found on many tanks during the war, from the Tiger 1 on both the mantlet as well as originally on the driver's port. Some of the early Stug 3s have this, as well as even tanks like the M26 Pershing have a similar concept and design. Now, as for the piece to install, it's very simple. You drill out the holes with a drill press, and then the ECA piece has the pieces already molded in, and you simply just slide the ECA piece directly into the holes. Once everything is blended over with the bodywork, it makes for a seamless appearance that gives you a nice little added detail, which would normally be left undone if you just go ahead and drill the holes out in a more traditional manner. Moving from the optic takes us to the sheath. Now, the sheath that you see here is a very distinctive portion of the 88mm gun mantlet found on the Tiger 1. The purpose of this large canister here is to protect the recoiling section of the 88 from any sort of damage or any sort of shrapnel which can cause harm to this area here, which can inhibit the gun from functioning properly with the recoil. Now, as for the piece itself, like I said before in the original unboxing portion, it is a CNC'd aluminum tube that gets mounted directly to the mantlet. Now, the piece itself is nicely done, so no reworking was required for the shape. What was added was that of the row of fasteners that we see here. The Tiger 1's sheath featured a pair of the slot screw fasteners in these three locations, and the purpose of this is that on the real tank, these actually hold and secure on a inner bushing that is found on the inner portion of the tube. The bushing is not needed for this model here, however, the addition of these details also greatly helps the look of the mantlet compared to leaving it absent of these details. Now, moving on for the sheet takes us to the sheet retention disc. The piece itself is a simple flange that will get bolted directly to the mantlet and will hold everything in place. Now, in addition to this, I also added a lot of adhesive to the sheath to secure it to the mantlet. The reason for this is that you don't want the piece to rotate on you, as the indexing of these fasteners are very important, as they are only in the way that you see it with this type of orientation. In addition to the glue, the plate, once bolted on, will flange everything together, keeping everything nice and snug. Now, for the actual fastening of this piece, this is something that has evolved from the Armortek design, and This tank here will actually feature a modification and an aftermarket part, which is no longer relevant on the current generation of Armortek tanks. Like I said before, the tank originally would not have had this little plate here of retention washers, which get mounted to the sides of the flange. This was a aftermarket piece, which I mentioned earlier. However, in addition to the kit being absent of these pieces here, for the actual fasteners used to secure the flange plate to the mantlet on the original Armortek kits, this was facilitated by 6 standard hex bolts. The hex bolts do a great job in holding everything together, however, are not very visually accurate. On the real Tiger 1, instead of using Allens or hex bolts for this application, the tank actually used these very large and very iconic acorn style fasteners. The acorn fasteners were used as, because of their point, give them a deflection of any sort of stray round which can possibly hit and damage the fastener, which can lead to issues. This is also found on many of the other German tanks of the period, namely the King Tiger, as well as the Jag Panther. As for the fasteners that you see here, these were an aftermarket piece supplied by the company Panzer Factory. Panzer Factory was around in the mid-2000s era, and they produced a limited range of custom-made 1/6 scale radio control tanks. Basically, they're really known for their M3 Stuart as well as their M4A3E8 Sherman. However, in addition to making these components here, they also had a limited range of aftermarket components for that of the 1/6 scale aftermarket scene. These fasteners will be utilized on this piece here, and these were again supplied with the starter kit from the customer. Now, as for Panzer Factory, I have no idea if they are still in business or if they changed names, as I believe there's another company called Cactus Tracks, which literally makes the exact same vehicles off this tooling that we have here. Now, like I said earlier, these two aftermarket components are no longer relevant, as the Armortek kit now supplies you with the photo etch straps, which look basically identical to these ones here, as well as machined acorn fasteners, which are used for this exact same procedure. And here's the mantlet of the model, now fully assembled and ready for its coat of base coat and then installation to the vehicle. As for the mantlet itself, as you can see, the casting has been fully completed since the last scene. And to finish off the casting, it was refined slightly, and also I went ahead and added the cast numbers, which are found on the top portion of the mantlet castings. This is found on several surviving examples at a Tiger 1 today. In addition to the cast marks themselves, you can see I have the plates fully fitted. Their corners have been bent up to lock the fasteners in place, which would be found on the real pieces. And also you can see I went ahead and added a well bead, which is found on this portion here of the mantlet ring. The piece, like I said before, will now head off into painting. And here's the turret just before the installation of the mantlet and trunnion cluster. Here you can see some of the mods that have been made. As for the mods, you'll notice that I went ahead and fastened and mounted a series of magnets to the inner perimeter of the turret. This differs from the way the kit was originally intended, in which the roof would be mounted to the turret with a series of fasteners. The reason why I went with the magnets, as due to all the machinery that will be located on the interior portion of the turret, the magnets are a lot better in that they still give you a nice strong bond, preventing the turret roof from popping off, but do not leave any unsightly fastener location holes, which would have to be blended in with bodywork, which will then remove any capability of being able to remove the turret roof. The use of magnets for this application is a common trick that I do on these 1/6 scale radio control tanks. In fact, I also did the same exact procedure to the hull with the top deck of that model, and that is discussed in a previous video. As for the actual magnets, they are mounted directly to the turret side, like I mentioned, and this was done via drilling and tapping the locations for the fasteners that are used for this installation. As for the roof, what's nice about these first generation Armortek kits is that the roof is made of a piece of steel plate. Because the piece is made of a steel plate, it is magnetic and will lock directly onto the magnets without having to make any other mods to the top deck itself. Now this differs from the more recent renditions of the Armortek Tiger ones, in which the steel plates were phased out and in favor of that of aluminum alloy plates. When they switch to aluminum alloy plates to do the magnet style setup, you have to mount on steel plates on the inside portion of the roof, which would lead to a little bit more body work, having to remove some flush mounting fasteners. However, with these older kits, that's not the case. As for the way the piece locks on, you simply line the front with the lugs that are present, and the piece just clicks in place. Has a nice audible click to it, and you know the piece is fully seated in. Now, as for the strength, as you can see, I could still move the whole turret around, and I could still pick it up somewhat, and this is only being held in place by that of the magnets. So this is more than adequate enough at doing the job that's at hand. Moving from the roof takes us to the front corner section of the turret. Now, on the real Tiger 1, you see these large straps that are found on the front portion of the turret. On the real tank, these are used to lock the trunnion into place. On the Armortek kit here, they are purely there just for detail purposes. Now, the top trunnion lock is made of a piece of CNC aluminum. It's one continuous piece, and is intended to be bolted to the side of the tank via two fasteners. Now, on this model here, I didn't use the fastener method for a simple reason that the holes didn't line up, and for me to drill and tap the holes wasn't really that necessary, as the fit of the trunnion lock to the turret is so tight that this can also be done with that of simple adhesives. Now, this piece here does not serve any structural or any type of important locking type feature. It is purely there just for that of detail purposes, so the omission of the fasteners is not an issue. Moving down to the bottom trunnion lock, if you notice on this portion here, I fabricated a new piece out of resin. On the opposite side has the kit supplied component. The kit originally supplies you with two of these CNC'd aluminum lugs, which are intended to be bolted to this location here to give the detail of the lower trunnion lock. Now, the reason why it is resin on the opposite side is simply due to the fact that I was missing the kit supplied version and needed to fabricate a new one. Now, just like with the top portion of the trunnion lock, this piece here serves literally zero structural purpose and is there purely for detail. So the omission of the metal for resin is not going to cause any issues. Now, unlike the top part, which was added on with adhesives, the bottoms need to be bolted on. This is due to the shape of the piece, rather than the top, which was that long, continuous aluminum CNC billet piece. The ones on the sides are just two small little rectangular shaped objects that need to get bolted on, as that's how they are held on. As for the fasteners, they're held on with countersink fasteners, and they will be tweaked slightly to have a better shape, as well as weld beads added to them shortly after the filming of the scene. While on the trunnion, another important component is that of the trunnion pivot pin, which also acts as the turret lifting lug. On the Tiger 1, that's facilitated by this component over here. Now, this is one piece that I mentioned briefly, and it has basically stayed exactly the same on all the subsequent releases of the Armortek kit. The piece is very effective in how it works, and is actually very true to that of the original real Tiger 1 itself. The way the piece gets installed is that the mantlet cluster gets slid into place, and this piece here simply threads into the pre-tapped locations found on the turret sides. Now, these pieces here are made of CNC'd steel, and if you notice, they have been pre-primed. But when it comes time to actually mounting in the mantlet, a smear of grease will be added here on the lug, as this is the bearing surface that the mantlet actually pivots on. To install it, you simply just index the holes, And there we go. And just thread it on. These pieces are very nicely done in both the shape as well as the design, how they install, and offer a trouble-free installation. What's kind of cool about them is they kind of remind me of that fastener that was used to hold the jaw of the Iron Giant, which was found at the end of the movie. As for the piece, it's left basically stock. The only mod that I did do was adding these two little divots here on the sides. These are present on these lifting lugs. Now, it's important to point out that the lugs with these little fastener, or these little divots I should say, are always indexed in a certain location. Matter of fact, they are wrong found on this version here, as this one is actually calibrated for the opposite side. When these pieces get installed, the divots should be in the format like they are going to be when I put the proper part on. And here goes the proper orientation for that of the divots. They go in a diagonal line from top to bottom. This is true on just about all of the Tiger ones that I've seen. Now on the real Tiger one, this piece here cannot come off and is actually welded directly to the side of the turret. The sculpted wall beads will be added shortly after the filming of this scene. And here's the muzzle brake, now fully modified and ready for installation. This unit here started off as the version which was showcased in the previous scene. Since that scene was filmed, the mods that went into it are as follows. First, I went ahead and added the wrench slits to the rear portion here of the retention castle nut, which is found on the muzzle brake. On the real vehicle, this would tighten up against the gun muzzle brake and would keep it and help it stay firmly in place. Another mod I made was that of the spring retention clip that I have here. On the German tanks, there's a small key and notch system that is found on the tip of the threaded end of the barrel, and this component here would have a plate with a lug in it, which would key into the hole found on the barrel. Then this fastener here would tighten everything together and help keep the muzzle brake from spinning and keep it firmly in place. Some other mods that I made to the kit muzzle brake was that of these cuts, which were added to the baffles on both sides of the muzzle brake. These are present on the real German tank pieces, however are absent on the stock Armortek component. To add the pieces, this was done on the mill. I put the Armortek piece in the vise, and with the mill I go ahead and remove the necessary amount of material. Moving from the baffles takes us to the inner rings that we have here. Now these components here are fabricated out of turned PVC. Now I do have these components in resin and I have used them on builds of the past. However, because of the blank firing system, the resin will not hold up with the expelling gases. The PVC, on the other hand, is more robust than the resin components, and the type of PVC I used was the more harder type, which is meant for a lot more industrial use. So it should be able to take the blast coming from the blank system. As for the baffles rings themselves, they are in the following format. You have a castle nut for the front, and on the back you have this type of dome-shaped component with two wrench slits found on both sides. The whole piece was primed and is ready for installation to the barrel, and it just simply threads onto the Armortek kit. Moving to the turret side detailing, first takes us to the tank's pistol port. Now, this being an early production Tiger 1, the tank does feature this pattern of pistol port, which is found on the rear corner of the turret side. Now, this of course was changed with the later production Tiger 1 units, where they went ahead and developed a more simpler plug style pistol port rather than this elaborate type design that we have here. As for the pistol port itself, what you see here is the kit component. The kit supplies you with a CNC'd aluminum pistol port. The piece has decent detailing and it will be used on this build. Now, what was fabricated were that of these little fasteners that we have here that are on the sides. They are made from pieces of bar stock, which I turned on the lathe. They're steel, and if we notice, I have little points on them. The fasteners which were found on the pistol ports were distinctive in having very pointy style fasteners. Now, if you notice, the kit does have the holes pre-drilled in. However, these pointy fasteners are not supplied with the kit, which is why I had to fabricate them out of steel. These will simply be mounted to the component and then will be simply mounted to the turret. Moving from the pistol port takes us to the tank's escape hatch. The escape hatch that you see here is mixed between Armortek kit original and aftermarket components. The components that are Armortek consist of the hatch and the hinge. Now these pieces here are carryovers from their mid-production Tiger 1 kit and are comprised out of the same white metal casting which was seen on many of the other components that I've shown in the previous videos. The piece does have the correct overall shape of the Tiger 1 hatch. Now one thing that is missing on these early Armortek hatches is that of interior detailing. The pieces were hollow cast like the way you see it here. Now pay no attention to the tooling marks. This was done by the original builder of the tank in order to fit in this component that I have here. This component is a Tiger 1 escape hatch detail insert. This component here was made from Panzertechnik, whose components I've mentioned in previous videos, and the component is specifically designed for the first generation of Armortek kits. The piece consists of a turned aluminum lug, which has the interior plug detailing, as well as steel and other aluminum components for that of the locking bar, as well as even functional tie downs. Once the pieces are firmly mounted in place, this holds the sliding lock mechanism which holds the hatch to the tank. These components are very nicely done. Now, as for if they are still relevant or not, not really that sure of, as basically I know on more recent renditions of the Armortek kit, these hatches were replaced with all CNC ones, and I believe may have these details molded in. However, I might be mistaken. Moving towards the rear portion of the turret takes us to the third lifting lug. Like I mentioned in the other scene, the Tiger 1 utilizes 3 large lugs to hoist the turret off of the tank's hull. On the front, the 2 lugs are mounted in the front of the trunnion and are also components that act as the pivot point for that of the mantlet. On the rear portion of the turret, it's just a simple steel lug like we have here. Now the component that we have here is the kit original. It is comprised of a single piece of CNC'd steel that is pre-threaded and simply bolts directly to the tank's rear of the turret. The rear of the kit is threaded and you just simply thread it on. Now one piece of detailing that is absent on the kit is that of the lug base. The base that you see here is modified from one of my resin sets which are offered on eastcoastarmory.com. Since the other 2 for the front are not necessary, I just needed one of the resin units and modified it to work with that of the Armortek lug. The lug simply threads onto the piece, and this here is now ready for installation to the tank. And here are the front details now fully completed with their weld beads added. The weld beads have been sculpted on in my usual manner. Now focusing on the bottom corner here, like was mentioned before, this was the kit original, and the opposite side a resin counterpart was fabricated. In addition to mounting the component on, one mod that I made was I went ahead and had to remove some material as the stock component sticks out a little bit more compared to what was found on the real German tank. The removal of the extra material was a simple procedure in theory, however, does require a steady hand in using a belt sander or even an angle grinder in order to remove the necessary material to make it to the same specs as the lock brace that's found on the top of the turret. Once done, the accuracy is also greatly helped, and the piece then had its sculpted weld beads added, blending everything together. This was a mirror image done to the opposite side of the model. And here's the pistol port now mounted to the turret. Like I said before, is a very simple installation and is assembled literally out of box with the caveat of replacement of the bolts with that of the spike bolt fasteners that we have here. And here's the escape hatch now fully assembled, weathered, and is ready for installation. The escape hatch is comprised of the same components which were showcased in the previous scene with that of the Panzertechnik insert, as well as the original Armortek hatch casting. You can see that seam where the 2 pieces meat has been completely and thoroughly blended in, making for a nice seamless appearance. The hatch insert itself is affixed to the casing with both adhesives as well as a fastener. You need to bolt the component on due to the type of stress that this component will be under. Having adhesives alone will not be strong enough to keep everything firmly in place, and the piece can pop off on you later on down the road, specifically with the type of vibrations that are present with a tank that is radio controlled like this one, which drives around quite often. As for the fasteners, no real modification needs to be made to the Panzertechnik component itself, as it is designed to be bolted to the hatch. And the way this is done is actually with this point here in the center. On the center portion of the hatch, there's a small little lug, which is a guide for that of the sliding lock bar. Now this component here, as was seen in the previous scene, came pre-assembled, and the lug is threaded into the center of the machined aluminum housing for the insert. Now, what's nicely engineered about the piece is that on the reverse side, the hole is still threaded and tapped, and with that, you can bolt the component directly to the hatch. This is done with a single fastener, which is found in the center here. This was modified from the kit original in that you have to drill out, you have to mark the center portion of the hatch, drill it out, and add a countersink well in order to put a nice countersink fastener. Now, as you can see, everything has been thoroughly blended over, nice and smooth, making for a seamless appearance so that there's no unsightly bodywork or even a divot for where the fastener was located. As for the rest of the hatch, it was again installed as is. Outside of the bodywork that was done to the rear and to the sides, the piece was basically left as is. Like I said before, it's nicely engineered. As for the rest of the hatch itself, I went ahead and added these two little notches on the hinge. The notches are present on the real Tiger 1 hinge castings, and also you can see I went ahead and smoothed out the 3D printed master cast texturing found on the original hatch. This was done with a palm sander, and while doing the bodywork for the center, I also smoothed out the pattern found on the hatch itself. However, you notice I did leave some texturing on the actual hinge. This is because on the real tank, this part here is a rough casting and does have some texture to it. Now, what will be added after the filming of the scene is that of a well bead, which will be added to this section here, but this will be shown in in the next upcoming update video. In addition to finishing off the hatch, the well section was also pre-prepped just prior to the installation of the piece. As you can see, it has its coat of Dunkelgelb, as well as some weathering that was airbrushed on. The reason for this is that once everything is all sealed up, the paint, when the rest of the pattern and the paint go on it, are not going to go inside of this portion here, and it's a good idea to weather this section here, as getting access to it once the hatch is installed is not going to be as easy as it is right now. In addition to the well itself, the hinge was also tweaked from the kit original. The hinge itself did start off as the kit original one, which was showcased earlier on when I was going over the parts. The hinge did go through some sort of modifications to it. First of all, the shape was altered and having these two little notches added to the sides. The original Armortek hinge was squared off. Now, in the real Tiger 1 hatch, the hinge was held on with 3 fasteners as opposed to the 2 which are found on the Armortek kit. The third piece is on this lower shelf that we have here. Now, this component here was added to the Armortek casting, and this piece here is purely for detail purposes. It does not actually hold anything to the tank. These 2 fasteners here are what do all of the fastener work, while the third one there is purely for show. However, with this detail added, it greatly helps improve the look of the component compared to the stock original version. And here's the escape hatch now mounted to the tank's turret. The escape hatch mounted on with the kit design pin, and it holds in place very well, and the piece, thanks to the insert, is nice and stiff with its mounting onto the turret, which is a benefit as you don't want to have this flop open on you during operation. A nice little tug is all that's needed to open up the hatch to get access to the blank arming switch. Now, since the previous scene, one little bit of detailing that was added to the escape hatch that wasn't mentioned previously is that of the rubber gasket. These rubber gaskets are found on this component here and are designed to be used with the Panzertechnik set. The Panzertechnik component does have a channel for this piece that is integrally found CNC'd directly into the aluminum insert. The piece that's for the gasket is a thin piece of rubber that is supplied with the kit and was simply mounted as per the kit's intent. Once the piece gets mounted, it also helps the look of the component and does give it a very nice little bit of detail accuracy. To seal the tank back up, I simply just take the hatch and lift it, and a little tap, and the hatch is now firmly back in place. Now here we have the elevation system now all hooked up. If you notice, the blank system is not currently hooked up in the scenes in order to give you a good idea on how the elevation system works without the clutter of the blank system in the way. The elevation system is controlled by this stick here on the radio. And here you can see me lowering the gun and raising the gun. This is all as per the Armortek electronics, and the system was very easily hooked up without really any much headaches. Now, it's important to point out that for extra ease and less strain on the mechanical components, a smeared grease was added to the threads as well as to the camming sections that are found in the brass components. This helps the component glide a lot more easily compared to having the pieces dry, which can add to extra friction. Now, one thing that is important to point out, another quirk with these early pattern type German Tiger 1s is that with the headlights. The headlights and also the bow hatches in the front, because of the angle of depress found on the gun, if the barrel is left at a low enough point and you try rotating the turret, you will strike and make contact with the bow headlights. This is another little quirk that needs to be kept in mind by the operator of the model. Here you get a good idea of what I was referring to with that of the elevation depress of the gun. If I continue to lower the gun, right there, you can see how you can easily make contact with that of the headlight. It's more likely some of these reasons that you see here why the Germans went ahead and replaced the dual headlights found on the top of the hull and replaced it with the single headlight found in the center of the glacis plate, which was found on later production units of the Tiger 1. Another quirk found on all the Tiger 1 family, and this is also true for the smaller scale versions like the Tegans and the Henlongs, is that when it comes to the power switch being in the tank's driver's hatch, the turret needs to be set at a certain way or else you can't open up the hatch as you'll make contact with that of the mantlet. So another important trait on these Tiger 1s to keep in mind is that when it comes time to turning the model off, you want to have the turret in slightly off amidships so you could open up the hatch to get access to the bow hatch. Like I said, this is a quirk with the Tiger 1, and I've seen it also found on the Tegan tanks as well. This is true for both the driver's hatch as well as the radio's operator's hatch as well. Now, with all of these electronical components out of the way, the last of the tank's detailing can now commence, which of course means the completion of the rear bin, as well as the turret roof detailing. Once all this is out of the way, the tank will go for probably 1 or 2 more test drives, and then the tank will head off into painting and then completion. And with that, that concludes this project update video for this vintage Armortek 1/6 scale early production German Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this build that are posted since the project start, as well as don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.